अच्छा ओके
चलें जी. So all right, so let's resume. मुझे लग रहा है कि मैंने आज जो प्लान किया वह रेस्टिंग मेम्ब्रेन पोटेंशियल पता नहीं मैं छेड़ पाऊंगा कि नहीं, लेकिन चलें कोई बात नहीं इंशाल्लाह. आपको मेरी स्पीड पढ़ाने की बच्चों कैसी लगती है? डू यू थिंक आई एम वेरी फास्ट? डू यू थिंक आई एम वेरी स्लो? डू यू थिंक आई एम नॉर्मल? क्या ख्याल है राबिया?
नॉर्मल सर.
नॉर्मल. तेज हो जाऊंगा तो गड़बड़ हो जाएगी, क्या ख्याल है?
यस सर, गड़बड़ हो जाएगी.
गड़बड़ हो जाएगी, चलो. ठीक है, नहीं इंशाल्लाह वी आर हम अपनी डेडलाइंस को मीट करते हैं विद रिगार्ड्स टू माय प्लान इंशाल्लाह. मुझे आइडिया है, मैं अपनी तरफ से, मेरा तो दिल चाह रहा था मैं आपको एक्शन पोटेंशियल भी आज ही पढ़ा दूं, लेकिन आई मीन देयर इज अ लिमिट टू व्हिच स्टूडेंट्स कैन अब्सॉर्ब. I mean, I was thinking that I would not have to go into details of spinal cord, but looking at the, you know, the instinct that you guys vibe out during the session, I felt कि इसकी भी डिटेल बता ही दी जाए, अच्छी बात है. O levels वाली बात पुरानी बात हो जाए. I don't know why by default we assume that you guys know everything from O levels. Well, while that is not true, and that's perfectly fine. चलिए, क्या ख्याल है? सही कह रहा हूँ मैं, गलत कह रहा हूँ? खास तौर पे अगर O levels मेरे से पढ़ा हो.
सर सही कह रहे हैं.
चले जी, okay. So this is the cross section of a spinal cord. The spinal cord, ये वाला जो portion मैंने blue color में draw किया है, इसको हम we call this thing as the white matter, and जो बाहर वाली चीज है उसको हम gray matter भी कहते हैं. Okay. No. Oh my goodness. मैंने उल्टा बोल दिया. Brain में इस तरह होता है, यहाँ पे the white matter is on the outside and the gray matter is on the inside. I'm so sorry, that's a mistake that I made. Let's clear this first. So यहाँ पे gray matter है और बाहर white matter है. Brain में it's the opposite. Okay, so now the next thing that we need to understand is ये जो बीच में एक आपको spore सा नजर आ रहा है, इस central canal, it's a small hole that exists. इसके अंदर fluid होता है which is basically there for nourishment. Central canal. You don't need to know much about this. अब आते हैं neurons में. देखें, सबसे पहले इस spinal cord की लेबलिंग को पूरा कर लें. ये वाली जो जगह है इसको हम कहते हैं mixed nerve, and I'll tell you just in a second why we call this as a mixed nerve. We call this thing as the dorsal root. और ये डोर्सल रूट में जो स्वेलिंग बनी हुई है इसको हम कहते हैं डोर्सल रूट गैंग्लियन. याद आया? बचपन में पढ़ा था. चलिए, अगर याद आ गया तो अच्छी बात है, नहीं आया तो कोई बात नहीं. Okay. So this is basically more or less the labeling that we need to know about the spinal cord. Now, I'm going to use 3 different colors for labeling all of the 3 neurons. Let's start with the red color. अब फर्ज करें ये आपका यहाँ पे pain receptor था, यहाँ से आपका neuron initiate हुआ. So let me label this as the pain receptor, for example. Pain receptor कर लें, temperature receptor कर लें, whatever the case is. Okay. So that's the sensory neuron. Wait. Okay. So that is the sensory neuron. It has entered the mixed nerve, and यहाँ पे करके इसकी cell body है, and then it basically terminates in the gray matter. Now, it's really important that we understand the distribution of the entire sensory neuron. So that's the cell body. ठीक है? और direction of nerve impulse हमें पता है, मैं एक अलग color से आपको direction of nerve impulse बता देता हूँ. So that's the direction of the nerve impulse, if you like. Okay, that's the direction. So if I were to ask you to label this fiber, is this the axon or is this the dendron? What do you think?
Dendron.
Shabash, that's the dendron. Okay, and this fellow here is the axon because it is taking the nerve impulse away from the cell body. और आपका sensory neuron का axon is terminating in the gray matter. So that's the axon end, if you like. Axon end of sensory neuron. Okay, all right. Then you have the next neuron, which I'm going to draw with dark yellow color. okay, and that is the relay or the intermediate neuron. ठीक है जी. अच्छा, ये जो सेल बॉडी के ऊपर मैंने स्पाइक्स ड्रॉ किए हैं, so I mean let's label this all together. That's the relay neuron. Relay को हम intermediate neuron भी कह देते हैं. It's one and the same thing, okay, and that's the cell body, if you like. And these are the, what are these things? You call them as dendrons, yeah, dendrites. You call them as dendrites, okay? Call them as dendrites. And I have deliberately left some space between these two neurons, and I'm going to encircle that space with this black dotted line, and you call that space as a synapse. So it's a gap jahan pe nature of impulse changes from nerve impulse to chemical signals, and inshallah this is a full-fledged separate topic that we're going to look in detail for later time to come. And then with a different color, let's say green, let me fill in the motor neuron, which is exactly like this. Iski cell body gray matter mein hai, lekin iska axon, it is moving out of the, and then eventually going to a receptor, like for example, a muscle. ठीक है जी, जो कि इस केस में क्या है, muscle, which is basically going to bring about a response. Okay, so again, that's the axon of the motor neuron, ठीक है जी, ये इसके dendrites हैं और ये इसकी cell body. And again, you can clearly see that there is a particular gap which is known as, again, synapse, jahan pe nature of transmission jo hai, that is chemical in nature and not in the form of the nerve impulse. Okay, okay, so you can clearly see that the direction of the nerve impulse, it is forming a shape that we can call as the, you know, I mean, if that's the direction that I'm pinpointing. This direction, it looks like an arc, okay? So basically, we need to know how do we define a reflex arc also. So I'm gonna write the definition of reflex arc right here. And I want you to note that down with me. It's the combination of a sensory, relay, and motor neuron acting together. Combination of sensory, relay, and motor neuron acting together to respond immediately to a stimulus, to respond involuntarily to a stimulus is called a reflex arc. Reflex arc. ठीक है? तो basically होता क्या है? देखें, the idea is very simple. You touch a hot object, या you touch a pinpointed object, और हाथ आपका फौरन पीछे जाता है without you even realizing. You realize it afterwards. So basically, यहाँ पे देखें, मैं label करता हूँ. So first, you touch maybe a hot object or a pinpointed object. A nerve impulse, the sensation is generated, which is converted or transduced into nerve impulse, which is carried by the sensory neuron. Okay, I didn't label this neuron. Let me label this here. This is sensory neuron. It is carried by the sensory neuron from the receptor to the central nervous system. And from there, it is transferred to the relay neuron through the synapse. And then from the relay neuron to the motor neuron, okay, again through a synapse. And then it goes to the effector, which brings about the response, which is known as the reflex action. Or iske advantages body ko kya hai? Basically, it saves you from potential damage. Okay, otherwise, aapka haath jal jaye jitni der mein aap haath ko piche leke jaye. Okay, so बहुत ज़्यादा डिटेल में आपको पता नहीं होना चाहिए, लेकिन generally speaking, you should know about this since it is in our syllabus. and there has been an instance where they have assessed this particular topic. ठीक है जी, are we clear so far about this reflex action? Anything that you don't understand from this?
No.
No, इसका मैं क्या मतलब समझूं? As in, you do understand?
Yes, I do understand.
Okay, चलिए जी, आगे चलते हैं. Let me give you new page. Okay, so all right. मैं आज resting membrane potential पे नहीं जाऊंगा. आज हम अभी जितना हमने किया है, let me give you some questions for that. Okay, so let's first talk about the same topic, which is reflex arc. चलो जी, so ये there has been, I think मैं year डालना भूल गया हूँ. This is one of the recent papers and this was an 8-mark question. ठीक है जी, देखें जी जरा. ये कह रहा है कि describe how a spinal reflex arc functions. That's one part of the question. And explain why it is an advantage to a mammal. Okay, 9 points उसने बताए हुए हैं. आप देखें, it's basically going to be exactly the same as I did. अभी मैं एक काम करता हूँ. Let me quickly take a snapshot of this और उसको मैं paste कर देता हूँ इसके साथ. Okay, yeah, I think this should do. चलिए इसको थोड़ा साइड पे कर लेते हैं. यहाँ पे we will refer to this. Let me make this slightly bigger. Okay, great. चलिए. Okay, so describe how a spinal reflex arc functions. Now I want you to look at all of the options. Okay. Describe. अच्छा जी, आप देखें सबसे पहले वो कह रहा है any aid from sense organ / receptor detects the stimuli. Of course, अगर आप कोई named example दे रहे हैं, for example, if you're talking about pain, then you will talk about pain receptors. या pain receptors. और अगर आप किसी गर्म चीज को हाथ लगा रहे हैं, if you're touching some hot object, then which receptor do you think you will be talking about? If we're talking about temperature, then which receptor will it be? It will be thermal receptors in the skin. Okay, thermal receptors. Okay. अच्छा जी. And उसने example दी हुई है, like for example, light, sound, heat. So an example is worth a second word. Okay. उसके बाद idea of a very strong stimulus. इसका क्या मतलब है? ये मैं आपको बताऊंगा इंशाल्लाह when we do all or none response. All or none principle. Inshallah, I will come back to this point then. असल में इसका मतलब ये होता है कि जो impulse generate होती है, या तो पूरी होती है या तो वो नहीं होती. Either it's in full strength or it's not generated. That's basically the idea what they mean. अगर strong होगी तो reflex action generate होगा. इसकी detail inshallah we will look when we do the action potential in detail. अब देखें यहाँ पे उसने क्या nerve impulse का word use नहीं किया बच्चों. क्या word use किया है? He has used the word action potential has generated in the sensory neuron. See, so as I said earlier, I reiterated this point here. कि जब आप बात कर रहे हैं, now you are talking about, you know, the nerve impulse. You should be talking in terms of action potential because again that's the key word. And inshallah, ये आपको ज़हन में रहेगा आपके because once we do action potential, you will understand that's exactly what we mean by nerve impulse. Okay, so action potential generated. Action potential क्या करेगा? वहीं पे रहेगा नहीं. The sensory neuron connects to the spinal cord. It takes the action potential there. वहाँ पे synapse है. Synapse is between sensory neuron and the relay neuron. Synapse with motor neuron or action potential passes to the motor. यानी कि आप देखें वो आपको यहाँ पे दिखा रहा है in point number 6 and 7 that it is going from the sensory to the relay to the motor through the synapse, and then finally it reaches the effector, which is maybe a muscle in this case when you're pulling your hand. And I mean, pulling your hand, for example, is the response. Pulling hand away is the response that maybe you are describing. You understand? और ये जो आपको ये वाली चीजें हैं, ये basically advantages हैं. यानी कि it is faster, it is automatic, response is always the same, and it protects you from the harm. Okay, so that's basically how, if it appears in the exam, this is how the examiner will assess you. Let's look at some of the comments of the examiner. Okay, it says, this question was generally well answered well by majority of the candidates who gave logically sequenced accounts of reflex art. क्या मतलब sequenced accounts? What do I mean? What do we mean when we say sequenced accounts of reflex art? Well, that's quite simple. I mean, look at this diagram. You don't say that the action potential is traveling to the motor neuron, then to the relay, and then to the sensory. I mean, you have to keep sense of the direction. You can't lose track of the direction. So it's sensory first, then the relay, then the motor neuron. Okay, so it's clearly the sensory first, the relay second, and I haven't labeled the motor, but that's the motor as the third. Okay, actually, let's come back. Answers focused on the transmission of impulses triggered by a receptor responding to a stimulus through sensory, relay, and motor neurons. Impulses were more commonly referred to than action potential. देखिए उसने यहाँ पे बात कर दी है कि बच्चों ने impulses का word use किया हुआ था. ये देखिए, let me underline this. Impulses were more commonly referred to than action potential. I mean, impulses is not incorrect to say, but action potential is more of what the examiner is looking. And synapses were not often included. बच्चे synapses को खा जाते हैं बीच में. No, you have to mention them. The link in the spinal cord was often omitted or incorrectly given as the spine. Again, all of this is happening within the spinal cord and not the spine. Spine is more commonly known as the backbone. So, I mean, you don't have to confuse with that. Virtually all were aware of a fast involuntary response of, and most included its significance as protecting the harm. Really, was reference made to the idea of a very strong stimulus, or that response was always the same. This is basically the all or the none principle I was talking about. All or none principle I was talking about. Inshallah, we will come to this when we do action potential. There was a proportion of candidates who stated that the sensory neuron detected the stimulus. अच्छा जी, यहाँ पे क्या मसला है? इस सेंटेंस, ये जो मैं सेंटेंस अंडरलाइन करने लगा हूँ ग्रीन से, ये आप मुझे बताएं इसमें मसला क्या है? There was a lines are so टेढ़ी हो गई हैं. Let's use technology to make straight lines. So मुझे बताएं कि इस लाइन में क्या मसला है? Yes, who will tell me? What's the problem with this line? There was a proportion of candidates who stated that sensory neuron detected the stimulus. G, Rabia.
Sir, I think receptor detect करता है stimulus rather than.
Excellent. It's the receptor that detects. ठीक है जी? And some candidates did not refer to action potentials or impulses and refer to messages or information. ये तो बहुत ही फजूल सी बात है. ये तो आपने बिल्कुल भी नहीं करी. Okay, so I mean, these are the things that basically we need to keep in mind. So that was as far as the reflex action is concerned. Quickly, before we end today, let me also give you a flavor of neurons wali question. Chale ji, ye dekhen ji zara. Again, this is from some recent papers. Let's quickly look at this question together. Figure 8.1 is a diagram of a sensory neuron and some receptor cells. Okay. Name the parts of the neuron labeled A, B, C, and D. Ji shabash, meri help kare. What is A?
Synaptic knob.
Zainab, A receptor है. Receptor का मतलब है direction of
Dendrite.
nervous. Shabash. So that's the direction of numbers. Yeah, that's dendrites. शाबाश. Dendrites. ठीक है. अच्छा आप देखें कि उसने yes exactly. So that's dendrites. B, what is B? So it's the fiber that is taking the nerve impulse towards the cell body.
Dendron.
Shabash, that's the dendron. Good. C, what is C? That's the cell body. That's obviously understood.
Cell body.
And D is the axon. Okay. ये देखें. ये सारा basically it's the same thing that we've answered. Okay. Another question. So there are two more questions that we're looking at. एक sensory neuron पे और एक motor neuron पे, and then we're going to end inshallah. Describe the structure of ये May June 17 का है. This is from paper 4 section B. 6 marks. Describe the structure of a motor neuron. Again, there are some rejections that I want to basically highlight. सबसे पहले देखें उसने dendrites की बात की है, leading to cell body, nucleus, many mitochondria, many RERs, long axon. Mind you, this is motor neuron. Okay. Synaptic knobs हैं, myelin Schwann cells हैं, myelin sheaths हैं. Except points on label diagrams. बहुत important बात. अगर आपको ये question आता है, will you be willing to draw diagrams? What do you think? Draw करनी चाहिए या नहीं करनी चाहिए?
Yes.
अगर आप डायग्राम से बहुत ज्यादा घबराते नहीं हैं, तो मैं आपको strongly encourage करूंगा go for it. Okay? Because they, especially इस topic में कुछ topics हैं जिनमें diagrams they actually suffice the text. Okay, so if you've labeled all of this, that should be sufficient. देखिए dendrites पे उसने reject किया हुआ at both ends. इसका क्या मतलब है? मोटर न्यूरॉन के दोनों एक एंड पे डेंड्राइट है, दूसरे एंड पे साइनेप्टिक नॉब है, जो मैंने आपको बताया था. यू नो दिस इज द पॉइंट दैट आई मेंशन्ड अर्लियर. ये देखें, at one end you have dendrites, but at the other you have the synaptic knob and not the dendrites. That's basically what we mean when we're talking about this. और यहाँ पे रिजेक्शन किस चीज के लिए है? न्यूक्लियस इन द सेल बॉडी. कह रहा है रिजेक्ट इफ सेल बॉडी नॉट एट वन एंड. मोटर न्यूरॉन के लिए जरूरी है, it is important for you to mention that the cell body is at one end. If somehow your answer is indicating that it is not at one end, then the examiner is categorically saying that you reject that answer if it is not at one end. Okay? Let's look at the comments of the examiner for this. Generally, candidates were able to describe the nucleus in a cell body, long axon and the myelin sheath. The term dendrites were often misapplied to the synaptic termini. देखें ये इन दोनों चीजों में आपने confuse नहीं करना. Synaptic termini different हैं, dendrites are different. So muscle की end पे जहाँ पे effector के पास पहुँच रहा होता है motor neuron, that is the synaptic terminal. Rather than just to extension of the cell body. Diagrams proved helpful, though were not essential. ये याद रखें, diagram के बगैर भी अगर आप, if you write all of the points without diagram, that is sufficient for you to score. Where diagrams were included, the points they show tended to be repeated again in the text. So again, if that's wasting your time, then don't draw it. A few candidates wrote about the sensory neurons instead of motor. ये इस तरह के बच्चे खलीफे होते हैं कुछ, जो कि क्वेश्चन ही सही नहीं पढ़ते. वो मोटर न्यूरॉन के बारे में क्वेश्चन पूछ रहा है और आप सेंसरी के बारे में लिख देंगे, तो फिर I mean, you understand what I mean to say. Not all candidates were able to correctly name the cell body. Those who mentioned the inclusion of mitochondria or rough endoplasmic in the cell frequently did not state that they are large in number. Mitochondria और RER तो सब cells में होते हैं, इनमें ज़्यादा होते हैं. That's the thing that we need to mention. And then again, the last but not the least, again you have in next year, May June 18 में उसने sensory neuron के बारे में पूछ लिया. Again, this is 6 marks. Again, it's the same points. Nucleus बस जो है वो थोड़ा center में होता है इसका. Long dendron, short axon, many mitochondria. Again, you can see all of the points are generally the same. Let me quickly read this examiner report before I end. The diagram was often used to show the structure of sensory neuron, but some drew a motor neuron with a cell body at one end, meaning credit could not be given. But यहाँ पे तो बच्चे वैसे फारिग हो गए. पूछा sensory का motor बना दिया. I mean, that's horrible. Candidates most commonly scored for describing Schwann cells and the nodes of Ranvier for stating that the cell body was the location of the nucleus. By the way, एक और चीज़ ज़हन में रखें. Schwann cell का अपना भी nucleus है. So don't confuse. I mean, look at this. So a neuron will have a nucleus, many nuclei of the Schwann cells also, but they're not part of the nucleus of the motor neuron. So don't confuse this idea. Every Schwann cell is a cell with a nucleus. Okay, इस diagram में उसने सिर्फ एक show किया हुआ है just to make things clear. Okay, fewer mentioned the presence of many mitochondria and many ribosomes or much RER. Some candidates were unfamiliar with the impulse traveling considerably distance along the dendron towards the cell body, followed by shorter distance along the axon. Again, the idea of the short axon and long dendron in sensory neuron. Many candidates misuse the term dendrites when referring to the structures occurring at either end, rather than just at one end. लोग बच्चे क्या करते हैं जी, कहते हैं जी दोनों ends पे dendrites हैं. Again, वो यहाँ पे ये बता रहा है कि वो post synaptic end पे और चीज होती है. इंशाल्लाह वो हम जब synapse करेंगे तो आपको मैं detail में बताऊंगा. All right, so I plan to do some more topics, but the time is up. That's fine. So I hope everything I did today was easy and clear. So let me quickly summarize. आज हमने दो चीजें देखी. We've seen the structure of neurons generally in detail, talking about the myelin sheath, the Schwann cell, node of Ranvier, and all of that stuff. And then we saw some differences between the sensory and the motor neurons. And then we have seen the reflex action in detail. Inshallah, tomorrow now we will look at both the major topics, the resting membrane potential and the action potential. Okay, kal ka topic बहुत important है. Please make sure that you're already fresh and in no way, unless there is a dire emergency, you miss the lesson. Any questions we have for today?
No, sir.
I hope everything I explained was clarified. मैं आपको अभी इसी वक्त जो है वो class notes भेज दूंगा इंशाल्लाह. See you tomorrow, same time, Bacho. Thank you. It was lovely having a session with you. See you tomorrow. Assalamu